And we are live. Welcome to our weekly webinar. I'm Lauren Seville. I'm the Roots and Shoots Manager here at the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada. And I'm super excited to be welcoming a very special guest with us today, Kelsey, who is one of our Youth Advisory Council members. And she is going to be talking today about the wildlife in her backyard in our beautiful eastern province of PEI. So I'm going to bring Kelsey on. Kelsey, welcome. You want to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, so as Lauren mentioned, my name is Kelsey, and I'm part of the Youth Advisory Council. Specifically, I work with the Climate Change Committee alongside 5 amazing young women who I've learned so much from this year so far. A little bit about myself, I actually graduated with my degree in biochemistry, and after graduation, like so many other people, I went looking for a job. And I actually ended up working at an environmental chemistry lab. While I loved working there and I worked with an amazing team of people, I realized I didn't want to spend my life working indoors. So I actually went back to school here in Prince Edward Island, where I'm currently studying wildlife conservation technology. And I've had the incredible opportunity to work alongside and learn from so much knowledgeable people in the conservation field, which is what I'm hoping to talk to you all about today. Not only the various wildlife you can find here on PEI and in many cases across the Maritimes, but also about some of the conservation practices that are being used here in Canada and in the Maritimes to support our native populations.
Great, Kelsey. Well, thank you. So I'm going to start the video. Hopefully this time we have no sound issues. So I'm going to start that now. And I will, please let us know in the comments if you can't hear any sound. I'll also be double checking that. And then after we finish watching the video, we'll be opening for comments from anyone in the audience and or questions for Kelsey. I have a couple questions myself. I got to watch the video a little early. So I'm excited to have you guys see. There's some awesome wildlife. She's got some great videos of them. So it'll be super fun. So here we go.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in today. The Jane Goodall Institute of Canada is happy to present
What's
in
my back
yard.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be talking to you all here today. My name's Kelsey, and I'm a member of the Climate Action Committee within the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada's Youth Advisory Council. With this council, myself and 11 other individuals from across Canada are working to advance Dr. Jane's vision to see forth a healthy planet where people make compassionate choices to live sustainably and in harmony with each other, the environment, and other animals. Like our last webinar, I have a quick video to remind us all about the role the Roots and Shoots program has within this ideology.
Imagine if humans are a part of nature, not just stewards of it. Animals and plants are our relatives, not our resources. Water is sacred, and we are its protectors. We take only what we need from the earth, so there is enough for all. We collaborate rather than compete. We think about how our choices will impact the next 7 generations. We understand that we are all interconnected, people, other animals, our environment, all our relations. Imagine if we could weave these indigenous ways of life into all lives together. We could create a path towards a world where every individual matters. Every individual plays a role in the global community. Every individual makes a positive difference every day. A world where compassion for people, for animals, for the environment unites us all.
Even with all the challenges we face this year, if you're interested, You can still get involved with the Roots and Shoots by accessing the resources available through the Roots and Shoots page found at janegoodall.ca. So to get started, I'm thrilled to be speaking with you all about wildlife found here on PEI. The video we're watching was taken at Greenwich, part of Prince Edward Island National Park. I've been lucky enough to have worked, studied, and lived here on PEI for the last 2 years. And while it's the smallest province in Canada, there's so much we can learn about the wildlife established here. I'm only going to be able to touch on a small portion of this today, but I thought I would start with a brief history of PEI. I'd like to acknowledge, before I really dive into this, that the land I currently live, work, and study on is the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq First Nation peoples. The Mi'kmaq peoples have inhabited Abegwit, what we settlers know as Prince Edward Island, for over 12,000 years. I personally aim to continue to learn and educate myself about our history and strive to continue to act as an ally to these communities. Prince Edward Island was settled by Europeans in the 1700s, at which time 98% of the island was forested. These forested, home to many different species, were cleared for farmland and to support a shipbuilding industry. Many of these wildlife species, like the black bear, the woodland caribou, the Canadian lynx, and the moose, were extirpated during these times, presumably due to hunting and habitat loss. By 1900, only 30% of forests on PEI remained. Currently, PEI is about 43% forested and is considered one of the most densely populated provinces in Canada. The pressures on the land create significant challenges for conservation work, but progress is being made. It's currently home to over 1,300 plants and 330 species of birds, among many more species of mammals, amphibians, reptiles, funguses, etc. And there's so much to discuss about PEI wildlife. The first species I want to talk about is a bird I've come across a lot this year on my commute to work every day, and a species many of you might have seen sitting on the side of a highway or near an open field right across Canada. This is known as the red-tailed hawk. So they're actually considered residents here on PEI, meaning that they're found all year long. And they're found not only on PEI, but from Nova Scotia right across to BC. They're fairly easy to identify because of that distinctive red tail we can see in the bottom image, but also by the loud screaming call that they make. This summer, we had a pair of red tails screaming above us while we were planting trees along a stream here in PEI. These hawks are beneficial to our agricultural industries as they often eat rodents from the fields. As a result, having large trees like yellow birch or red maple with large forks in them are important to encourage nesting near these open areas. Interestingly, these nests are often reused by either the red tails themselves or other birds of prey. So here on PEI, we actually have a number of birds of prey, including our hawks, eagles, owls, and falcons. Not only do we have the red-tailed hawk, we also have ospreys, bald eagles, northern harriers, sharp-shinned hawks, merlins, kestrels, among several other species. Some of the images we're looking at here is we can see the northern saw-whet owl in the pair of 3 in that upper left-hand photo, as well as the great horned owl in the upper right-hand photo, and a osprey in that lower left-hand photo. One of these birds of prey I want to dive a little bit deeper into is the barred owl. It's fairly common here on PEI. It's one of only 2 residents. The other is the great horned owl. However, there are at least 8 owl species potentially found here on PEI. The barred owl has a distinctive call that you will probably hear before you see it at night due to its silent flight. It goes, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" These little fellows like to respond to any owl call. They're very curious in nature and will actually come up to you if you play your calls for them. Like many birds of prey, they are opportunistic, meaning they will feed on the easiest prey possible, including roadkill. Another interesting fact is they will regurgitate their food waste in pellet forms that you'll often find on the ground in the woods. These pellets contain feathers and bones of its prey. This summer, I did stumble upon four-barred owls along the stream here on the North Shore. This is most likely a family group, as they typically live alone or in mated pairs with territory beside each other. The last bird of prey I want to talk with you all about today is the bald eagle. So in Prince Edward Island in 1954, there was no population of bald eagles. This was primarily due to it being considered a nuisance bird, so they were removed from their habitats. However, when the pesticide DDT was recognized to have such an impact on populations of birds of prey due to the change in the hardiness of the eggshells, the species was listed as protected here in Canada, and people were no longer allowed to remove these so-called nuisance birds. Today, the population is considered to have recovered and is thriving here in PEI. PEI is now home to approximately 500 individuals. And as a fun fact, we can see in these right-hand images, the juvenile bald eagles don't have that characteristic white head, and they actually don't get this key feature until they're about 5 years old. This is a pretty interesting image. This is a picture of a bald eagle's nest found here in Prince Edward Island. As you can see, they are quite large. In fact, you can see the bald eagle itself, its little white head sitting beside it, and the nest is enormous. They use these nests every year, either adding or rearranging materials as needed. What we were going to do with this nest this summer with the local watershed I was working with was to have someone come out and band the eaglets. Unfortunately, we couldn't do it because of COVID. The bands were stuck in Ottawa. But when they do bird banding on eagles, they generally have somebody go up the tree very carefully and lower the birds down to get banded and measured and weighed. This does have to be done at a specific age to avoid the birds jumping out of the nest before they're fully fledged. And it's usually best to be done in about June here in PEI, and you do have to have a permit to do bird banding. To give a bit of insight into what they learn about banding these birds is they actually have found eagles banded here in PEI wintering in Maine. So it does give us some information on their migration. It can tell us about mortality rates, wintering grounds, population dynamics, and population density of a species, and can help provide insight for research projects across both Canada and the rest of the world. I have been lucky enough to have participated in some bird banding here in PEI. With bird banding, there are a lot of controls that go in with it, and a lot of planning associated with these practices. The weather does have to be ideal, so it shouldn't be raining and there shouldn't be a ton of wind to prevent injury to the birds. The birds are also removed from the net as quickly as possible and handled for as short of a period of time as they can. They generally weigh the birds, sex the birds, and take key measurements, and then fit a band that has to be the right size and put on properly as to not cause abrasions. So there is a bit of training that is associated with it. The birds are also held between two fingers, like you can see in those images, and this is to prevent injury and to keep them calm. You don't really want them to be struggling too much. They are then, when it's time to be released, set into your hand, not just dropped, to allow to fly away when they're ready, which is usually quite quickly. The two birds I'm holding here, the one on the right, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is a blue jay, and the one on the left is a downy woodpecker. But to tell you a bit about two woodpeckers that we commonly find here in PEI, there are two that look a lot alike. This is the downy woodpecker and the hairy woodpecker. The key identifying feature for these birds is actually their beak size. So the downy woodpecker, which is in my hand on the left, has a shorter beak. It's generally 1/3 of the size of their head. While the hairy woodpecker, you can see on the right, has a longer beak. It's about the same size as the bird's head. in that species. Both these woodpeckers do rely on dead or dying trees to provide cavities to nest in. So if you do have a dying tree, that might be a reason to keep it around if you can. And they're both seen right across Canada. So this bird here, I actually came across when we were out for a hike, and this is a common habit you're going to see. So woodpeckers don't call. They actually have a noise that they get from pecking the wood, for lack of a better word. And it's also how they search for their food. So these woodpeckers generally like to eat insects like larvae that live inside the bark of the tree. The red fox is another common species to PEI. These furry four-legged creatures are seen in both urban and rural areas and do have a pretty high population here. There are really two interesting facts about the fox that I want to talk about. The first is that they were an important part of the economy here in the 19th and 20th centuries for their fur. There were fox breeders that actually sold their pelts back to Europe during this period, and that's one of the reasons there's so many different morphs of fox on Prince Edward Island. Morphs refer to the color of the red fox. I'm not sure how many people might have seen a black or a silver fox, but they are the same species. They are considered a red fox, but they're just a different color due to the genetics of the species. So it's a recessive gene. Another fun fact is father foxes are really good dads. They'll actually play with their young, and at a few months old, when the baby foxes are supposed to be finding their own food and not being reliant on their parents anymore, their fathers will actually bury food nearby so the young can learn how to hunt and locate their food and just make sure that they're doing okay during this transition period. The next species I want to talk about is one I'm sure all of you are familiar with, the beaver. Beaver populations are definitely healthy here on PEI. These little engineers build their dams to protect themselves as they're proficient swimmers and not great walkers on land. If you've ever seen a beaver waddle, I'm sure you'll agree. However, their dams can be set in the wrong spot and will impede fish passage and migration, which is a concern for people here on PEI. As a result, beavers will either be relocated or removed if they're in this wrong location. This is generally in the winters when it should be done, as in the summer months, they have young that require parental care. And you can actually see in these photos, so this was an orphaned baby beaver. It was rescued and rehabbed actually in Nova Scotia, and it was lended to me by a friend for the purposes of this presentation. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about the beaver was we actually had a beaver dam in the watershed I was working at this summer. The dam was deemed to be too far downstream and was impeding fish passage. We knew that there was large brook trout both upstream and downstream of the dam that were unable to move and share genetics because of the location of this dam. So one of the ways that we determine if the beaver is still present is by notching the dam itself. This basically means that we put a hole in the dam so the water starts flowing. And when beavers hear the sound of running water, they will come in and fix the dam within a few days to prevent their habitat from changing. It's kind of an aggressive way of knocking on the door, but in beaver form. As you can see, our beaver actually had moved upstream. At a later point, we did find the dam. It had moved several kilometers away. So we did end up removing this dam slowly over the course of several weeks, and this was to prevent the sediment from flooding downstream all at once. Usually, we would build brush mats, which are used to capture the sediment, but we were upstream of a sediment bypass pond that had been excavated the year before. So a sediment bypass pond essentially exists to capture any sediment or soil that's coming off the land, usually due to erosion from like agricultural practices or industrial practices. And by capturing the sediment, we're actually preventing the buildup in the river that might damage fish spawning grounds. We actually left up a little portion of the dam until next year. This was to allow time for the banks upstream of the dam to regenerate. We have plans to plant native trees in this region to stabilize the stream banks as part of the watershed restoration work we're doing. And all of this work actually here on PEI was completed with a proper permit. So you can't do anything within 15 meters of a stream here on PEI without permits from the government. So our watershed had that in order to do this work. But once we did remove the dam, we actually set up a trail cam in this region to see what species were using the habitat, and we found some pretty interesting species. So this is a pair of wood ducks. These are cavity nesting birds with distinctive markings. They are considered migratory, so they only are in our region during their breeding season. They're really interesting because what happens after they have their eggs and the eggs have hatched, when it's time for them to fledge, the mother duck will stand at the bottom of the cavity on the ground and will call for her babies to jump out of the nest, sometimes from great heights. If you haven't seen this before, you should definitely Google this later because it's super interesting. So because they need their cavities near streams or water, sometimes you will see nests put up to help these individuals continue to breed in these regions. Wood ducks are seen across the southern border of Canada. And like I said, this is primarily during their breeding season. And they also, fun fact, have strong claws so they can climb on branches and things. The other bird you see in this photo, and you can just kind of see the bottom of them there, is a great blue heron. The great blue heron is another migratory bird here on PEI. We, again, typically see them in the summer and the spring. They are still a few around PEI right now. A fun fact I learned this summer, actually, is that the herons, while often seen near the water, actually nest in the canopy of trees like spruce trees. So this one here is kind of fun because he had just caught a fish. So I thought that might be an interesting photo to show you all. So the heron was actually a fixture in our trail cam pictures, but so was this American muskrat. This individual was captured by the trail cam pretty much all day in August this summer, running back and forth for apples, actually. They do look like beavers, but they have a very different tail. As you can see in this image, the muskrat has a round rat-like tail. Fun fact, actually, about the muskrat is they will sometimes stay in beaver lodges without the beaver knowing or consenting. They're kind of like little squatters in the beaver lodges. Another fun fact is that beaver lodges can be distinctly different from muskrat lodges. The muskrat lodges are mainly made of vegetation instead of sticks, and muskrats also do not create dams. Another species that was once a big part of the historical fur trade here on PEI in the 19th and 20th century is the American mink. This little fellow looks a lot like a weasel. Typically, they have a little white patch on their chin that you can see in that baby mink there. But fur breeders here on PEI didn't select for this trait in the early 20th century. They wanted them to be all brown. So when the fur trade fell and the mink were released, we now see many mink here on PEI that might not have this characteristic white chin. The mink are also an interesting species because they're really fierce predators and will spend a significant amount of time in the water. They can take animals down as prey as large as ducks under specific circumstances. So the final species we saw on the trail cam was a flock of ruffed grouse. Ruffed grouse are a native bird to PEI. They sort of look like wild chickens. The first time I saw one, I was a bit thrown for a loop on what it was. They are early successional forest species. They generally feed on aspen or poplar trees as a primary food source and use downed trees or logs for drumming displays that attract their mates. This is very interesting and something you also should look up after this presentation if you haven't seen it before. Another interesting fact about the ruffed grouse is they actually don't need to drink water. So having water in their habitat is not an important feature. They actually get their water through the vegetation that they consume or from the dew that is found on like leaves or branches or anything else. We actually spotted a flock of these grouse while we were driving on a back road here on PEI. We also had a group visit our backyard a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it on camera, but that was a pretty fun surprise to see. To change the topic slightly, there is one more thing I want to discuss about wildlife here on PEI, and that is salmonid monitoring. PEI is home to at least 3 salmonids: brook trout, rainbow trout, and Atlantic salmon, and all 3 populations are monitored, and freshwater fish conservation is an important aspect of conservation work here on PEI. The first species I want to talk about is Atlantic salmon, which was discussed in our last webinar. If you haven't seen it, it's great. You should definitely go check it out. So Atlantic salmon are native and historically found in specific rivers here on PEI. However, populations have declined or been extirpated in some areas. There are programs that are restoring these populations through stocking. Last week, I was actually fortunate enough to get to see some of the work being done here in PEI. And one of these projects is to capture salmon during their migration upstream. Basically, what happens is these salmon come in from the ocean in the fall and will travel through fish ladders that are designed to help move the fish farther upstream to spawn in key habitats. So what these projects try to do is actually gather several individuals each year, usually about 6 females and 12 males, and they're brought into a stocking facility, and the eggs are gathered and fertilized as quickly as possible, and the fish are brought back to the stream, the adults. If they don't get enough males, they will actually just put all the fish back and allow them to naturally go about their spawning. The purpose of these projects are to release the fry, so the baby salmon, into either new rivers or back into different streams across PEI as part of reintroduction in order to reestablish populations in streams that have been impacted by sediment runoff or pollution or overfishing. And they try to do this as early as possible to actually prevent any reliance on people. And by introducing them at that stage, the fry as adults, once they leave to go to sea and come back, will return to their natal streams with hopes that eventually over time, the populations will naturally begin to return to their historical levels. So as you might have noticed in the last picture, these salmon can get quite large. This here is a male grouse, meaning he spent only 1 year at sea before returning to his natal stream. We can tell he's a male by the kype or the hook structure on that lower mouth. These fish, to keep them as healthy as possible, were only out of water for as short of period of time as we possibly could. So although we do have photos of them, they were running with a bucket of water to get the fish into the holding tank and where they're applying oxygen to it as fast as possible because they want to minimize stress as these are an at-risk species here on PEI. This is one more picture of our Atlantic salmon. These are 2 females that were multi-sea winter salmon, meaning that they spent multiple years in the ocean where they feed to continue to grow. So salmon, this is a fun fact, actually don't feed as adults when they're in the freshwater to spawn. They'll overwinter in the freshwater and then return to sea in the spring. And this is actually different than the Pacific salmon, who will actually die after they spawn when they return to their natal streams. So another species that we have here on PEI are the rainbow trout. These are considered exotic, meaning that they're not historically found on PEI. However, we do have stable populations here. They were most likely introduced for angling purposes, and we can identify them by that distinct pink line that runs through the center of their body. Our third salmonid on PEI is the brook trout. These are found in many rivers and are actually considered an indicator for healthy streams. The brook trout has distinctive white lines on their fins. You can kind of tell if you look at those lower fins, and they have this reddish colored belly. One of the monitoring practices for fish populations is to actually do surveys. So they capture the fish and move them into holding tanks. And then they use clove oil in the water to help sedate the fish to minimize the stress during handling. Basically, after they're sedated, we measure them and identify them, and then they're moved to a separate holding tank with a bubble machine. And the idea of the bubble machine is to increase the dissolved oxygen in the water. And this helps the fish recover and get better, whereas we continue to monitor them before we release them. So we really want to make sure these fish are in good condition and that we haven't had too much of an impact on them before we reintroduce them back into the stream. So thank you all so much for listening. I know this was a lot of material. If you have any questions about anything I went over today, feel free to ask me either now or later at my email, which is posted right here. And I've also included a couple really great resources and interesting reads that you can find on the next slide about wildlife here on PEI or different techniques. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it and you all have a great day.
Well, thank you so much, Kelsey. That was great. So informative. I loved seeing all those photos of the cute wildlife. I actually have a little downy woodpecker that made an appearance in my backyard this summer, which was so cool to see. So tiny and cute. So thank you so much. And now we can open it up to questions. If anyone has any, you can pop them in the chat box. And I'll start off because I have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask Kelsey. So how did you get involved with wildlife conservation?
So I got involved in a couple different ways. First of all, like I said earlier, I'm studying wildlife conservation here at Holland College. And basically what that entails is I'm spending a significant amount of time learning both about the ecology and wildlife management and forestry practices, different things like that. And as well, we spend time in the field actually developing skills and meeting a lot of incredible people working in the industry here on PEI. And the second way I got involved in conservation here on the island is actually I was hired by my local watershed group this summer. So I spent 4 months working with them on watershed restoration. So we were doing stream clearing, improving fish habitat. We were tree planting, a bunch of different things. If people are looking to get involved, I highly encourage you look and see what your local watershed group is, because oftentimes they do community events or are looking for volunteers to help them with different projects. So if you're looking for a way to get involved, that's a great place to start.
Great, that's awesome. So we have one question from our Facebook. Trisha asks, my students would like to know your educational background and why you went into this area.
Yeah, so I graduated high school and immediately went to university. And when I was there, I actually went to Queen's in Kingston, Ontario. I chose to go there because they had an open first year. And at the end of my first year, I ended up selecting biochemistry. So I finished my degree there in 4 years, started working in environmental chemistry, and decided I just didn't want to work in a lab forever. I did want to be outside and doing more hands-on field work. So I started looking for different programs or different ways to kind of convert my education. And I found this program here on Prince Edward Island. And now I'm finishing my second year, and hopefully we'll see where things go after that.
That's awesome. And also one more question from Trisha. Can you explain to the students why the sand is red, and do you think this affects the habitats at all?
Okay, so why the sand is red? I'm not 100% certain, but taking a guess from kind of what I've heard from people over the years, I'm pretty sure it has to do with the iron in the soil. And iron over time oxidizes and creates that red tinge to our soil and sand. I actually have no idea if it has any impacts on salmon or different species here on PEI, but that's definitely a question that you might be able to either find research that somebody's done on, or maybe you yourself can do in the future.
Awesome. So they're in Eastern Ontario as well, located, Trisha, in her class. And then I had one more question. Kelsey, like I mentioned, is part of our Youth Advisory Council, which is a council of 12 youth from across Canada who are doing work around climate change and Indigenous perspectives from kind of a youth lens, and kind of giving us their kind of youth experience and kind of insight to kind of navigate Roots and Shoots, because it is a youth-led initiative. So Kelsey, I'd love to know why you ended up choosing to work on the climate change
committee.
Committee.
With my educational background, climate change is such an important part and an important topic of conversation in conservation work and in all of our lives. So a big part of what I'm passionate about is making small changes in my everyday life to kind of support the things I'm interested in. And I thought the Climate Change Committee would be a really great way to share ideas and exchange knowledge about what we can do on a daily basis to walk the talk, to live the way that we believe. And I think one of the really great initiatives that we have coming is the Sustainable Year starting in January. And I'm really excited to work with our team to get that going and kind of challenge ourselves to make better choices in our lives.
That's awesome. And yeah, so everyone, please stay tuned. We will be launching as Living a Sustainable Year in January of 2021. And we'll be continuing also these In My Backyard webinars with the rest of our climate change committee in January and through the rest of the winter and spring. So we have about four more webinars to go in our series this fall. So please stay tuned every Tuesday until mid-December. We'll be having them. But I just wanted to say thank you again to Kelsey for joining us. Super informative, really loved learning about all of this and just seeing all this stuff, because I've never been to PEI, so I feel like I got to travel a little bit to PEI while we're all staying at home. So thank you so much, Kelsey, and we're going to say goodbye here. So thanks everyone for joining in. It was great to have you, and I hope that you guys can join us next week. We'll be talking about how to apply for our APE fund, which is our funding opportunity for Roots and Shoots groups. So you can get involved, get a grant in either a sustainable food project, Indigenous perspectives, or climate change to actually do your own Roots and Shoots project. So stay tuned next week about how to apply, how to do that, and what opportunities are there through the APE fund. So I will see you guys all next week. So thank you so much.